Hi, my name is Greg Wilson, and this talk is called What Everyone in Tech Should Know About Teaching and Learning. It's an update to one that I've given several times over the last few years. All of the material is freely available online under a Creative Commons license. I'll share the URLs at the end, and I hope you'll find the next 40 minutes useful. So here's my pitch. We know as much about teaching and learning as we do about public health. The difference is, most of us don't know how much we know. By the time you finish high school, you know what vitamins are, what germs are, where babies come from. You probably don't know similar basic facts about how people learn and how best to teach them. And I'm going to try to give you an overview of some of those facts in the next little while. Rule number one, you have to design lessons for 3 different kinds of learners. This is Professor Patricia Benner. She was at Stanford University, and in the early 1980s, she was studying how nurses go from being novices to being experts. What she found is that most of the time, most people go through 5 fairly predictable stages of cognitive development. They don't just add more knowledge, they learn to think differently. And when I say most people and most of the time, that's because there's always a distribution. But this progression is fairly predictable for most neurotypical adults. Benner's model has 5 stages. For our purposes, we're going to boil it down to 3. You're a novice, you're competent, or you're an expert. Some of the symptoms of being a novice are that you do things by rote. You have a recipe that you follow, but you don't understand why those steps, why they're in that order, or what to do if something goes wrong. Novices will often ask nonsensical questions, like what color is the database? A third symptom is that novices frequently can't tell what's relevant and what isn't. It's very common, for example, to see novice programmers put their own variable names or file names into queries on a site like Stack Overflow. They don't yet have a clear distinction in their heads between what belongs to the library and what is specific to their program. One thing that is not a reliable symptom of being a novice is confidence or the lack of confidence. This is down to something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know about a subject, the less accurate your estimate of how much you know and don't know. If you're a novice, you could believe that you're an expert because you don't yet realize how complicated the topic is. What makes somebody a novice is that they don't yet have a working mental model of the problem. In high school, when I was first learning chemistry, we used ball and stick models. Carbon is black and has 4 holes, nitrogen is blue and has 3, oxygen is red and has 2, and hydrogen's smaller and only has 1, and then the bonds are these little bendy gray sticks. Now, everything I've just told you is a lie. Atoms are not hard-colored balls with fixed holes, atomic bonds are not bendy sticks, but this is a really useful model for somebody who's just getting started. It doesn't have to be complete or correct, it only has to be useful. And your job with novices is to help them build a working mental model of a problem. One of the ways you can do this when you're designing a lesson is to draw a concept map. This is one created by Amy Hodge at Stanford University, and it shows the key concepts and relationships for a public library. There are buildings that are filled with books and other materials. The staff purchase those materials and the patrons can check them out. The patrons can also ask the staff questions or take their kids to story time, which is a program at the building, and so forth. It isn't a complete description, but as a patron of a public library system, if you understand this, you can do a lot of things. One thing it's important to notice is that the relationships are all labeled. The relationships between the concepts are as important as the concepts themselves, because the relationships are how you reach the knowledge you need when you need it. If I tell you that A and B are connected and I don't tell you how, you don't know when to pull fact B into your mind. When you are teaching, you want to emphasize the connectedness of the knowledge so that facts are retrievable. And drawing a concept map and labeling the connections helps you do that. Now, there usually isn't one unique best concept map for any subject. For example, if you're the administrator of the library system, your mental model might look like this. Yes, you still have staff, but you've got facilities instead of just the branches because the trucks have to park somewhere. You've got labor unions and city government. Right in the center is budget because if you're managing something, budget is usually at the center of your mental model. Different people might have different perspectives on the same problem. That's a good thing. When you're designing a lesson, you have to decide which one you're trying to convey. Drawing it out helps a lot. All right, that's novices. What about experts? One of the symptoms of somebody being an expert is that they can see solutions at a glance. They look at the problem and they say, oh, it's obvious, you need to recombobulate the Framistan. Another is that they can switch between different points of view very quickly. In math, they'll go from attacking a problem geometrically to attacking it algebraically and back and forth. Another symptom is that they tend to be much, much better at debugging. They can reason forward, but they can also reason backward from effect to likely cause. And finally, they often have difficulty explaining their thinking. Experts have often forgotten what it is to not understand something. So they will often look at a problem and say it's obvious when it actually isn't. And this kind of expert blind spot means that competent practitioners are often better at teaching novices than experts, because the competent practitioner remembers to explain all of the steps. Now, people don't actually store knowledge in their head as graphs, but we can use that as an analogy to explain why novices, competent practitioners, and experts think differently and why we need to teach them differently. A novice's mental model is disconnected. She might have all of the facts, but they don't all join up. And I think we all know what that feels like when you're new to a subject. These things are swimming around, but you're not sure how they all connect. Now, a competent practitioner has a joined up mental model. If I give her fact A, she can reason her way through to B and C and D, and then maybe take a wrong turn and go to J and Q and have to back up, but eventually she'll get to E and then to the solution F. What makes the expert different is not that they have more facts. They usually do, but that's not what's important. The important difference is that their mental model is much more densely connected. If I give problem A to an expert, she can jump directly to solution F because there's a direct connection in her head. She isn't reasoning her way through the problem. She is doing pattern recognition. She's recognizing problems and their solutions in the way that you recognize human faces. This is great if you want the problem solved, but from a teaching point of view, you can see why the expert would be less good at explaining the intermediate steps. It's because they don't go through those intermediate steps any longer. You have to retrain an expert to see the world through novice eyes to make them a good teacher. What impact does this have on teaching methods? With novices, you want to be a guide. You have to decide what they should learn next because they don't know enough to know what the next step should be. You are pushing knowledge at them. For competent practitioners, you want to be a mentor. Give them problems, allow them to run at their own pace, but be there so that they're never stuck for more than a few moments. They're pulling knowledge out of you when and as they need it. One of the mistakes we make when we're teaching is that we stay in guide mode too long or switch to mentoring too soon. If you continue to push knowledge at a competent practitioner, they're frustrated because you're telling them things that mostly they already know. If, on the other hand, you tell a novice go off and explore the problem, they're frustrated because they don't know what to explore. Experts are different. Mostly, you don't teach experts. You get them to think about their work, and you give them feedback on their thinking because they're able to self-correct. They know enough to be able to tell when they're on the right track and when they're not. The conversation with you helps them do that more efficiently. Rule number 2. A lesson is a user interface for knowledge, and everything we know about designing user interfaces, we can apply to designing lessons. For example, it's very common in user experience design to start with what are called personas. You make up a fictional character who captures key properties of some segment of your intended audience. You should do the same thing when you're building lessons. You don't have to do this for each lesson, but if you're teaching in a high school, if you're teaching in a boot camp, inside a company, at a university, you probably have 2 or 3 prototypical learners that you want to address. You should describe them so that you have a clearer idea of what you can expect. For example, suppose you're teaching an introduction to data science. One possible learner is Anya Academic, who's a professor who's done a lot of statistics but hasn't programmed before. Another possible learner is Exton Excel, who understands his business problems and has done a lot of work in Excel, but doesn't really think of himself as doing statistics. In the upper right, we have Larry Legacy. He's been using SAS for 35 years. He doesn't want to switch to Python or R. He's what we call a reluctant learner. The most important thing there is going to be convincing him that he does want to learn this. And finally, we have Michelle Manager. She used to be a programmer. Now she leads a team of programmers and data scientists. We'll take a closer look at her in a moment. Every learner persona should have 4 points. First is their general background. Who are they? What do they do when they're not programming? Make it a person so that they can extrapolate and fill in gaps. Second, what is their relevant experience? Describing what they've done before turns out to be more useful than having a bullet list of prerequisites for a course. Third thing is their perceived needs, and that's probably the most important bullet point on this list. What do they think they want to learn? There was a study done several years ago that compared the search terms parents use when they're trying to find coding camps for their kids with the terms those camps use to advertise themselves. And there was very little overlap because the camps are using the jargon that is comprehensible to people who already understand the material. And finally, you should include one special consideration for each of your learners to remind yourself of the many ways in which they might be different from you. Let's come back to Michelle Manager. She's 38, she has a degree in computer science, she programmed in Java for a decade and then became a project manager. She's helped to build a lot of reporting tools and she's done budget forecasts, but has never done any machine learning and has never taken a statistics course. She needs to know enough about data science to hire people and to arbitrate technical arguments amongst her team about what tools to use and how to build the pipeline. She's not going to be hands-on with that, but she is the one who makes the final decisions. Finally, she's a single parent with 2 young children, so evenings and weekends are not available. She can't do night courses, she can't do weekend boot camps. All right, that's a very different learner from an undergrad who is doing a degree in economics, who can dedicate time to the course during the week. Next rule, you want to use what are called formative assessments as unit tests during learning. You want to check for learning while the learning is taking place, not just afterward. It's called formative assessment because it forms or shapes the learning while the learning is taking place. And to illustrate it, here's my all-time favorite formative assessment question. What is 37 plus 15? You're teaching multi-digit addition to children. You give them this question. 52 is the right answer. If the child says 42, it's pretty clear that they didn't carry. 7 and 5 is 12, so they wrote that down, and then 3 and 1 is 4, so they wrote the 4 on top of the 1 from 12, or they never bothered to write the 1 of 12 down. The second most common mistake when children are learning this is to say that 37 plus 15 is 412, because 7 and 5 is 12, so you write that down, and you squeeze the 1 and 2 together if you have to, and then 3 and 1 is 4. They're wrong, but they're wrong for a different reason, and they need a different explanation in order to clear up their misconception. Now here's the one that really got me. How do you get 43? You carry the 1 back into the original column. 7 and 5 is 12, so you carry the 1 back there and add 2 and 1 and get 3, and then you add the 3 and 1 and get 4. You've seen the teacher carrying, you know you're supposed to do the extra addition, but you don't realize it belongs in the tens column. Again, it's wrong, but it's wrong for a different reason. Each of these different wrong answers gives you insight into the learner's mental model. If you come up with formative assessment questions while you're building the lesson, or even before you build the lesson, it forces you to build a mental model of your learner's mental models, and you will automatically and perhaps unconsciously build a better lesson because now you know what mistakes you're trying to prevent or clear up. A good formative assessment doesn't have to be a multiple choice question. There are lots of other different in-class exercises you can use. You want them to be quick, 30 or 60 seconds max, so that it doesn't derail the teaching. You want a single unambiguous right answer so that it will scale. The most important thing is diagnostic power. You want each wrong answer to tell you something useful about what to say to that learner next. Using formative assessments in class tells you, the teacher, whether you can move on. If everybody gets the right answer, you're done. If everybody gets the same wrong answer, you clear that up. And if the spread is even across all possible answers, the odds are nobody understands it and that they're all guessing, so you've got to back up and try a different explanation. It also tells the learner if they actually understand it. It's okay for somebody to leave your class not fully understanding something. It isn't okay for them to leave believing they understand it when they actually don't. And while it isn't on the slide, One other way you can use formative assessments is preemptively. In the very first linear algebra course I took many years ago, the professor came in, turned on the projector, put up his first slide, and it was a multiple choice question, A, B, C, or D. It's a pretty easy question. I think everybody got the right answer. So he said, great, here's 20 minutes of your life I don't have to waste. And he set aside that section of slides and put up the next multiple choice question. Most of us got it. Great, there's another 20 minutes of your life I don't have to waste. It wasn't until the third question that enough of us were wrong that he dove in and started teaching. He was dynamically adapting what he taught based on feedback from the learners he actually had. We loved this guy. Doing this meant that he was wasting less of our time telling us things we already knew, which gave him more time to focus on the things that we didn't. He was respecting our prior knowledge, and that motivates learners a lot. Next rule, you want to manage the learner's cognitive load. Here's a very, very, very simplified picture of the cognitive architecture of the human brain. As a rough approximation, you have long-term memory and short-term memory. Long-term memory is your permanent store, it's your hard drive. You don't have direct access to that. Instead, you have direct conscious access to short-term memory. Think of that as a cache on top of long-term memory. You are constantly retrieving things from long-term memory to store temporarily in short-term memory for use, and then encoding the contents of short-term memory and writing it back to long-term memory. Okay, so that's the back end. On the front end, for the kinds of academic learning we do, most of the input is speech and images. If we were talking about teaching cooking, we'd add the sense of taste, the sense of smell, and so forth. Most of us get most of our input through our visual channel. What comes in through the eyes and ears is constantly being integrated, and it's that integration that gets written back to long-term memory. And this is why it is provably more effective to reveal slides a little bit at a time than to put a complex image up and then talk over it. If I show you part of this and then add more, there is some synchronization between the appearance of new visual information and the appearance of new linguistic information. They get encoded together, and that means that later, when you're presented with the diagram, looking at part of it is more likely to trigger recall of what was being said at that time. This diagram also explains why reading is weird. Reading is such a recent invention that our brains haven't caught up. What happens when you're reading is that text comes in as visual information, gets processed by that part of your brain, and then that information has to move sideways to be processed by the linguistic centers of your brain. Some people struggle to do that. They have a reading disability. They can see just fine, but they can't move that information over to process as language. We don't know why not, but to be honest, we don't know why any of us can. Even for those of us who can do it, it's an extra burden. And there's some wonderful studies by Mayer and his colleagues that compare 3 different ways to teach the same lesson. Method number 1, I put up the diagram and I talk over it, and then I measure how much you've learned. Method number 2, I put up the diagram and the text of what I would say, but nobody's talking. Method number 3, diagram, text, and the teacher is reading the text aloud. Most people will learn more the first way, an intermediate amount the second way, and they'll learn least the third way. Here's why. If it's a diagram and speech, you have parallel information streams coming in. If it's a diagram and text, you've got 2 kinds of information coming in visually, some of which has to be moved over to the linguistic centers of the brain. That takes extra effort, which means there's less effort available for actually learning. And if I have the diagram, the text, and the speech, there's the extra work of checking that what I'm reading and what I'm hearing are consistent. Your brain's going to do that automatically, and you can't turn it off. However, what I've said is true for people who are fluent in the language of instruction. If the language being used for teaching is not your first language, then yes, there is an extra load in checking what you're reading against what you're hearing. But on the other hand, you're getting a chance to clear up misconceptions or misperceptions. You can actually give somebody a language proficiency test and predict which of these 3 modes is going to be most effective for teaching them. One of the many implications of this for teachers is that if you're recording videos, you should always have closed captions, but allow people to turn them on or off based on what works best for them. Another important realization is that short-term memory is the bottleneck through which all learning has to pass. Speech and images come in, and they've got to get through that bottleneck so that they can be encoded and written to long-term memory, because if it doesn't go into long-term memory, learning didn't occur. And short-term memory is much smaller than most people think. One piece of evidence for this is phone numbers. Most phone numbers around the world were 7 or 8 digits long, because that's how many random digits you can remember for a few seconds when you're reading a phone number out of a phone book and dialing it into an old-style rotary phone. Examples like this led Miller to realize in the 1950s that short-term memory can hold about 7 plus or minus 2 items, and you'll see that magic number quoted over and over again. Modern estimates put it even lower. 4 plus or minus 1 is a typically quoted figure. And it isn't just for small facts. If you take a look at human social groupings, there's a natural break at about half a dozen members. For example, if you take a look at an American football team, you don't have 15 people on the field. You have 8 forward and 7 back. If you take a look at any social grouping, like conversation around a dinner table, above that magic number, the group spontaneously decomposes into subgroups because you can't keep track of what more than about half a dozen people are thinking or saying or doing at once. One of the implications of this for management, by the way, is that if you have 20 direct reports, you're either doing your job badly, or there are unofficial leaders, or you've made the job so uniform, like assembly line work, that you can think of multiple people as being one person. Okay, so what impact does this have on lesson design? Here's a concept map for photosynthesis. If you count, there are 9 concepts and 7 named relationships. There are 16 things here. There's no way you can fit all of this into a person's short-term memory on first encounter. What you have to do when you're building a lesson is break it up into chunks. Pick a piece that will fit into short-term memory. Photosynthesis produces glucose that stores energy. That's 5 things. I can load that up, and then I can keep it in short-term memory by asking a formative assessment question, giving you a second example, putting up a diagram, something to hold it in short-term memory for those crucial extra seconds so that it will be encoded and written down to long-term memory, and then I add another chunk. I can't tell you how to decompose your concept map for your lesson. What I can do is count to tell you if you're trying to teach too much in one go. All of this brings us to cognitive load theory. And to explain it, imagine that you're learning Frisian, which is a dialect of Dutch, and I ask you to translate the sentence, "How is her knee today?" from English into Frisian. I'm actually asking you to do 2 things. I'm asking you to recall vocabulary, and I'm asking you to remember the rules of grammar. You have a double cognitive load. But if I give you the words and ask you to rearrange them to form the correct sentence, I'm reducing your cognitive load. I'm allowing you to focus all of your energy on the grammar. Experiment after experiment has shown that if you break problems down into more digestible pieces, people learn faster. There are 3 types of cognitive load. The intrinsic load is what the learning task is supposed to be about. In this case, it's the grammar of Frisian. The germane or relevant load is the extra work that you have to do, but it's not really the point of the lesson. In this case, it's recalling vocabulary. And finally, you have the extrinsic load, which is all of the irrelevancies. In this case, why are the fonts different? You will learn faster with this exercise if the same font is used throughout, regardless of what the font is, because your brain is being distracted. It's wondering whether the different fonts are a clue of some sort, and you can't switch that off. So the different fonts are purely load. There's no benefit from them. This doesn't mean you're spoon-feeding learners. The picture on your screen right now is a balance bike. It's a toy for children, which looks like a bicycle but doesn't have pedals. Children are learning to ride bicycles at a younger age now because we're reducing cognitive load. The balance bike lets them learn how to balance and steer, and then later we add the pedaling. Music teachers will say that learning how to sing is one thing, learning how to play piano is another. Learning how to sing while playing piano is a 3rd skill. And one of the things we often forget as educators is that the integration of skills is a skill in its own right. Okay, next rule, active learning beats passive learning every time. On the left, you have what are called passive learning strategies. You absorb the knowledge now and you use it later. On the right, we have active learning strategies, where you are using the knowledge as it's coming in. And study after study has shown that active learning outperforms passive learning. Using the knowledge while it's coming in keeps it resident in short-term memory so that there's a greater chance of it being encoded. It also forces you to recall other information from long-term memory, so you're more likely to build the connections in your mental model that allow you to recall the new knowledge later. However, university students report that they prefer passive learning. Most people are procrastinators, and most of us have been trained by school to expect to sit and listen in class and then do homework later. The irony is that only applies to some forms of learning. If I show up to learn how to play soccer and the coach says, watch me kick a ball around for an hour, now go do it on your own time, I'm going to go find a better coach. The same is true of learning music or learning dance. But with academic learning, we think that we should listen now and use later, even though the evidence tells us we'll learn faster if we use the knowledge while it's coming in. There are 6 strategies that have been proven in laboratory experiments to accelerate learning. These are things that your learners can do, but they're things you can design the lessons to facilitate. We don't have time to go into all 6. You can find a really good discussion at learningscientists.org. Just to pick one, it's called interleaving. It turns out that if you randomize the order in which you study things, you build long-range connections between facts, and you avoid accidentally training your brain to recall things in only one specific order. This is one of the reasons why flashcards are such an effective study tool, as long as you shuffle the deck every time you use it. If you go through the deck in the same order every time, you're essentially training your brain to only recall this piece of knowledge after that one. Next important fact shouldn't need to be said, but it does. Learners are not robots. They have feelings, they have values, they have their own goals, and you have to take those into account when you're building and delivering lessons. It turns out that the best predictor of whether or not a neurotypical adult learns something or not is whether they are intrinsically motivated to learn it. If they're learning this for their own reasons, because it helps them meet their goals, the learning will stick. If they're doing it because they have to, the learning probably won't stick. I remember walking out of an engineering economics exam years ago, and as I'm leaving the exam hall, my brain is forgetting everything I'd learned that semester in that course because I never wanted to learn it in the first place. One motivating factor is self-efficacy. People want to feel that they're in control of their own life. And this is one of the reasons, for example, that using formative assessments in class is such an effective tool. If you see in class that people haven't understood a concept and you go back over it immediately, it's not just a more effective teaching strategy, it also signals to them that they've got at least one hand on the steering wheel. They have some control over the pace of learning, and that by itself will encourage them to learn more. Second motivator is utility. Will this help them meet their own goals? And a third one is the sense of community. My mother used to sign up for a class every winter at the local public library so that she could hang out with other retired school teachers and complain about the state of the world. I know a lot of people who get involved in boot camps and other informal learning situations, in part because they want to learn, but also because they want to hang out with those people, and the learning is a pretext for doing that. If you are running a boot camp or weekend workshops or something like that, having learners sign up in groups so that they're coming as part of a community and following up as part of a community can make a really big difference. All right, those are motivators. What about demotivators? The biggest one is unpredictability. If what you're doing doesn't seem to affect the outcome, you're going to give up. Software does this to people a lot. Sometimes works for me and sometimes doesn't, and I can't see why. Pretty soon I'm just going to say, you know what, forget it. A second one is unfairness. If people believe the teacher is playing favorites, they will all do less well. If you're the favorite, you don't have to try, and if you're not the favorite, there's no point trying. One way that you can address this, for example, is to use blinded grading. When people submit assignments, you don't know whose work you're grading when you grade it. A third demotivator is indifference. If the teacher doesn't care, neither will the students. This turns out to be one of the differences between adult learners and child learners. Children model the behavior of the adults in the room. If the adult is excited about Saturday morning ballet class, or Saturday morning Hebrew lessons, or Saturday morning hockey, the kid will be excited too. If the adult is just phoning it in, that's what the kid will be learning. Your learners will never care more about the lesson than you do. That doesn't mean you have to jump up and down and wave your arms, but people are very quick at picking up on insincerity and indifference. One of the ways you can operationalize all of this is to learn how to be a good ally. And I'm a big fan of the work of Valerie Aurora, and there's a link here to the Ally Skills workshops that she runs. Dobbin and Caleb found that most of the things that American corporations have done over the last 20 years to address discrimination and harassment in the workplace have either had no effect or made things worse. One of the strategies that does work is to teach people how to intervene when they see something going wrong, so that they're more likely to actually take action. Here's what this looks like in practice. Suppose you have a student in your class who has a medically diagnosed attention challenge. In order to maintain focus, they have to talk to themselves while they're coding. Now, some other students in the class have come to you and said they find this distracting. What steps would you take? What's the first thing you would do? And then if that didn't work, what's the second thing you would do and why? Thinking through scenarios like this helps prepare you not just for this situation, but for others that are nearby. The most important thing is, if you feel like you have some idea of what to do, you're more likely to do something, which is usually better than doing nothing. We're coming up on the end, but there's a few miscellaneous things I'd like to cover before we wrap. One of the questions I get most often is, what do you do when you have a broad spread of learners in a single class? Rule number 1, avoid this if you can. Anything you can do before the class to steer people in the right direction, to get them into the right room, is going to make life better for everybody, but that's not always possible. A second strategy is to split the room. You teach for an hour or for a morning, and then at the break you say, all right, these people are going to go to room A, these people are going to go to room B, and then you keep going at different paces in those two rooms. Pedagogically, it's quite effective, but socially it can be a minefield. Most people don't want to be put in the slower room. A third strategy is to use advanced learners as helpers. If you have a few people who are much more advanced than most of the other learners, get them out of their seats and have them help other people, because they will learn more from teaching than they would learn from listening. This works well if you've got strong community ties, but I have found that in many industrial training sessions, people resent it. They think they're there to learn, and even if you tell them they'll learn more by teaching others, they're still expecting you to do all of the talking. Option number 4 is to use pair programming or some other kind of pairing. If you have two learners together sharing a laptop, number 1, the pairs are going to be more homogeneous than the individuals because skills are going to average out. Number 2, it helps people realize that they're not the only one in the room who's struggling, which can make a big difference to motivation. And number 3, again, if there are differences in prior knowledge or prior skill, the stronger of the pair will learn more from explaining things than they would learn on their own. One other option that we were just starting to explore before COVID hit is synchronous self-paced work. Everybody shows up, they're sitting together in the same room, but the lessons are all online and they're going through it at their own speed. Well, if they're doing that, why are they in the same room? Because that's where the helpers are. Everybody is going as fast as they can, but when they get stuck, somebody can come over and get them unstuck right away. They can talk to a neighbor, there might be a TA or an instructor floating around, and they get the social rewards of talking to people over a coffee break. I haven't yet experimented with this model online. If you have, or you know somebody who has, I'd like to hear from you. This brings us to 2 challenges that you're always going to face. The first is the perils of pre-assessment. Years ago, I used to send out questionnaires before a training course to find out how much they already knew about version control, the Unix shell, Python, or whatever it was I was going to teach. What I didn't realize was that people who were less confident in their skills would look at that say, well, I don't know all of this, and then decide that they weren't ready for the class. They weren't used to instructors modifying the curriculum to fit particular learners. In high school and university, we're accustomed to the curriculum being fixed and you're either ready or you're not. So those questionnaires were scaring away a lot of the people that I most wanted to help. We weren't really selecting for prior knowledge, we were selecting for self-confidence. So this effect hurt some groups much more than others. The only way around it is to have built enough trust with your learners for them to understand what you're doing and to believe that's why you're doing it. Another issue is the problem of false beginners. A false beginner is somebody who superficially is at the same level as a true beginner, but has enough prior knowledge from another domain that they're going to be learning on a very different curve. For example, 3 years ago, I had never programmed in R. If you gave me a quiz on R, I would score pretty close to 0. But having programmed in several other languages before, I was able to pick it up much more quickly than somebody who'd never programmed at all. There's no quick and easy way to distinguish true beginners from false beginners. So you need to have some sort of adaptive strategy, such as splitting the room, so that you don't have half the class confused and the other half bored. There's a couple of things I need to get off my chest before we close. Many people have heard of the idea of learning styles. You're a visual learner, you're an auditory learner, and so forth. It's nonsense. It is not true. It is the astrology of teaching. In the early 1980s, a reputable group of researchers said, look, different people get different proportions of information through different channels. Maybe we can tune the teaching material so that if you get more information through your visual channel, or if you prefer to get information through your visual channel, we'll give you more information that way. By the 90s, after many, many experiments, even the original proponents of this idea acknowledged that it doesn't work. But by that time, a bunch of companies had sprung up selling teaching materials based on this myth. And they're not just going to close their doors because it turns out that the myth has no substance. A second myth is the learning pyramid. And I've got a picture here. You remember 5% of what you learn from lecture, and 30% from demonstration, and 90% from teaching others. This diagram was made up by an ad agency in the 1950s. It's been copied from one corporate presentation to another. There is no scientific foundation for it. It's plausible. It is consistent with our prior beliefs, which is why it seems to persist. But those numbers have no scientific foundation. And I've even seen 3D renderings of this where it's a learning cone. Yeah, drawing it in 3D doesn't make it true. Okay, so now we can close up. This is a screenshot from Minecraft, but it is also, for me, a look at the future of education. Like a lot of people, 15 years ago, I was very excited by MOOCs. I thought we're going to put videos of the greatest teachers online. We're going to use AI to grade people's exercise and to tune the teaching material. It's going to revolutionize teaching. I was wrong. It turns out that the big distinction is not online versus in person. The big distinction is interactive versus recorded. Books and recorded videos are much closer to each other than either is to a conversation with another human being. When I watch my daughter play Minecraft, they don't care if the person they're playing with is sitting on the other end of the couch or is literally an ocean away. What they care about is that they can interact with each other in real time. I think the future of education, particularly post-COVID, isn't about using robots to teach people to behave like robots. I think the future is building places where they can discuss with each other, where they can interact spontaneously with each other as they're learning and solving problems. And I think we've only just started figuring out how to do that. If you'd like to know more about the things I've covered, here's some good starting points. James Lang's book, Small Teaching, talks about what you should do if you know what the right thing to do is, but you don't have the time and you don't have the budget. Therese Houston's book, Teaching What You Don't Know, covers exactly what the title suggests. How do you teach if you're only a page ahead of your learners, or not even that? The book, How Learning Happens, is a really good and very opinionated introduction to the current state of research. It goes through key papers, explains what they thought they were proving then, and talks about what's happened since. I don't suggest reading it from cover to cover, but whenever I encounter something I don't know, that's where I turn first to get started. Brookfield and Preskill's The Discussion Book isn't just about teaching. It's a catalog of 50 different techniques you can use to get people to share information and make decisions. I've been involved in a lot of teaching and community activities for many years. Of the 50 techniques in that book, I had only ever seen 15, and I've only ever seen 5 or 6 implemented in software. There's a lot of great ideas here that could turn into better conversational and learning tools. And finally, I've taken what I've learned over the last dozen years and put it all together online at teachtogether.tech. All of that material is free to read. You can also buy a print edition from Taylor and Francis. All of the royalties go to support charity. The 3 rules at the top of this slide aren't everything you need to know to teach, but they're the most important thing you need to know. Start where you are, use what you have, and help who you can. I hope you've enjoyed this talk. You can find out more at thirdbit.com, and the URL is up there for these slides. If you have questions, I'd enjoy hearing from you. Thank you for listening.